Hi, I'm Jennifer Slickburn, the game pioneer from Game Brain podcast. I'm here today to talk about Imperial Steam, a game published by Capstone Games, and a game that I've been looking forward to since I heard about it, and it has delivered on nearly all of my expectations. So Imperial Steam is, I don't know how, it's a rail game, but it's hard for me to describe it as a rail game, really, because I'm used to cube games, and it's not a cube game. I'm used to 18xx games, and it's absolutely not an 18xx game. And, it's certainly not in the Ticket to Ride and those kind of light rail games. I mean, it does use trains, and it does have stock. But for one thing, the stock isn't anything that anyone can buy, like in 18xx or in cube games. You can buy other people's stock, and hopefully it'll go up, and you'll make great choices, and you'll win the game, right? Here, that's not true. You have pieces called investors that can buy your stock, but it leads to a very unusual conclusion. So, at the start of the game, there's a map. Before I get started, as of October 20th, 2021, there are no reviews or discussions of Imperial Steam on Board Game Geek. And unfortunately, I cannot give you like a nice playthrough or a tutorial or a long review. And that's basically because I don't do my own editing. My son does he edits my videos, and he has a lot of work. So I have to keep my videos relatively short, so he's not spending a ton of his personal time on my videos. So at any rate, so this is going to be a discussion of the game and what I like about it, and one small little thing that I am a little disappointed in. So, at any rate, then, the board has links to cities that existed in Austria-Hungary during the 1800s. The board, if you look at it, will remind you of brass. The game is not like brass, but the board reminds you of brass. There are 11 actions that are laid out that are laid out. It's an action selection game, but as has been said, it's not a worker placement game, really, because all the players can select in theory, all of the actions. There is no blocking in the action part. There is major blocking on the map, but there is no blocking of the action, so everybody can take any of the actions. I should note that if you take, for every action that you take where you have your action piece already there, you lose 10 influence, and that can be consequential. So in the game, the first things you're going to be doing is building track, and you're going to buy workers. The tiles on each city have what's known as an effort number. So when you start the game, you start with 2 workers in the column that give you 1 effort each. So, particularly in the 3-player map, but also somewhat in the 4-player map, you may not be able to build 2 tracks, even though in theory you could, or at least not be able to do that without going to the worker action and buying workers. What's interesting about buying the workers is that as players buy them in the various columns, the cost goes up for everybody. So if I buy in the green column and I buy 3 workers, well, that's $60. So the next person who comes along, if they are forced to buy from that column because they don't have enough influence, then they, with their first worker, would be $30. And for them to buy 3 workers would be over $100. Well, you only start in the 3-player game. You start with 130, and in the 4-player game, you start with 140. You have to spend part of that to get your initial influence up so you can buy workers at all. So even at the very start, you have decisions to be made that could definitely impact your early game. The other part of the tile is going to be a cost to buy a train station. You only get 2 more train stations to place, so you want to be a little thoughtful, but at the same time, they gain income. Money is incredibly tight in this game, and it can go up and crash and come back and crash. So just willy-nilly, spending on early train stations for the income may not be the best idea. So as you're playing, you're laying out your routes. If a player places on a route that someone else has already taken, or someone else's have already taken, that player has to pay each player that's already there $10. So in a 3-player game, it could get very ugly. In a 4-player. However, we haven't seen that in the 4-player, noting that we have yet to have a fully experienced 4-player game. So I'm not going to say that couldn't happen. And in fact, speaking of that, they recommend, and I recommend, that you use the fixed start for new players. And this is so that you don't get boxed in, so that the gameplay doesn't become very frustrating because of things that, you weren't aware of until they came up and kind of slapped you in the face. So we have always been using the fixed start, because, like I said, we haven't had 4 players or even 3 players who have played the game before. So, during the game, you can pick up contracts. And what those contracts do is very, very interesting. It's by far the best use of contracts I've ever seen. When you start the game, you have a train and 3 freight cars, and those freight cars come loaded with what it takes to build the 2 tracks. Well, then you have opportunities to turn those freight trains into income, or when you take a contract, you have to dedicate some of your freight cars to fulfilling that contract. You also, in the game, there's a stock market. You start with 1 investor, and your stock is worth $40. Well, you can get additional investors when you take a contract. You can also raise your level, like it goes from like 30, 60, 90, I believe 130. And you can do that by going to an action that allows you to spend influence to raise your contract value. Or there are also little places on the board that you can raise your contract value for free. So, like, you might raise your contract value and then later on get investors to match that contract value. Because if you raise your contract value without any investors, and contracts are the only way you can get investors, then you can't spend the investor to get the stock value. So you definitely, as you're raising, you want to also add investors. Well, so let's say my investor's at 90 and, I'm totally broke and I really need money. So I can take off an investor and put them on a separate place on my board and get my $90. Hey, that's great. But there's a problem. At the end of the game, each investor that you spend in that way gets 10% of your total money, right? So, particularly if you fulfill a couple of contracts plus everything else in the game, you could be at $600, $700, $800. So that investor will get their investment back as 10% of your total money. And of course, if you take a stock investment 10 times, that means at the end of the game, you get no money because the investors took it all. So, hopefully, I don't think that will ever happen. I mean, it'd be pretty serious to mismanage your money that way. But I did lose because I had 4 investors who took 40% of my final score. So do think about it. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, you get income, but the income is not much, folks. I mean, you're happy to be getting 50 a turn and your expenses are going to be way more than that. Well, the other way to make money is to build factories. And so when you build a factory, there's only certain spaces on the board where you can build a factory. And as I was mentioning to you, when you build, your worker board has basically 3 columns. Your workers can be in the first column, second column, or third column. If you build a factory, you must take a worker. If you take a worker from the first column, then let's say that you build an iron ore factory. Then you'll get 2 iron ore cubes. Let's say from the second, it's 3, and from the third, it's 4. You build your factory, maybe you get 3 iron ore cubes. Well, on the board, there are 4 major cities, and then the 3 and 4 player, at least, I'm not sure about the 2. I haven't played it with 2. In the 3 or 4 player map, there are also small spaces where you can sell 1 resource. When you sell your resource, you look on the factory chart, and that tells you how much money you get. The fewer factories of that type that are out, the more money you're going to get. The only problem is these cities only take 1, period. So if I have iron ore resources and the player next to me has iron ore resources and we're both connected to the same place that wants iron ore, only one of us will get it. This can be very painful because you were counting on that money, right? And you didn't get that money and the other player did, which puts that player in front of you because they have, money that they can spend on trains or resources, and you're kind of hung out to dry. So when you play the game, be very aware of turn order, of how a player can increase turn order, and of what's on the board. Try not to get locked into one delivery because savvy players will deny that for you. So, like I said, it's a very brutal game. The other thing is, I was mentioning contracts, and, they paid from 90, I think the highest paid is like 400, but they only pay if someone builds from Vienna to Trieste. And I'd say that's probably about 10 rail placements. And it's going to be difficult because some of the rail placements take either a tunnel engineer or a bridge engineer, and those cost extra. Plus, the tunnels and the bridges take more resources than just the regular rail. So you aren't going to be able to like rush Trieste. The other thing that's really interesting too is that if you are the one that gets to Trieste and the other players have contracts, even if they didn't fulfill them, they still have to pay you 20 money per link that they don't have to Trieste. So, if things can work out, you can make 100 or so off of getting there, and they're still piddling around up at the top of the board. So, that's kind of the short of it. Like I was saying, hopefully there'll be playthroughs and reviews and other videos so that you can get a better sense of the game. But the game is very, very competitive. It's not interactive as in I take that action and you can't have it. The interaction is frankly way better. Okay? And you're always going to be looking at the other player's influence and their resources and what they can do on their turn that might affect what you can do on your turn. So, there's a few problems. I mean, one, like for example, you can run out of resources. The rules don't say what happens when you run out of resources. But it's like brass. You just pay the highest price and at the bottom of the resource spaces, and the resources are infinite. The rules don't say what happens if there's a tie. And the designer has clarified that if there's a tie, as far as he is concerned, it's a shared victory. The rules also don't say, and this isn't going to happen very often, and you really have to kind of, be a little not understanding what you need to do kind of thing, but you can run out of money. And if you run out of money, then I guess all you do is go to the $10 or whatever. But just doing that and knowing that you could run out of money probably as early as the 5th round, maybe earlier. And so you would be sitting there doing nothing except getting $10. And I don't know, that's kind of a bad feeling. I mean, the rules certainly tell you to learn from mistakes and don't expect to win the game the first time. But yeah, that can happen. So that was somewhat of a disappointment. I would have liked the designer to say, hey, maybe you can concede at that time, or maybe, it could be like 1830 bankruptcy and boom, the game's over and everybody counts money. I don't know. But just keep in mind. So at any rate, yes, Imperial Steam has delivered on nearly all of the counts. I have played it 5 times in maybe 2 weeks. I'm hoping to play it this weekend, and I'm hoping to be able to keep playing. It's a really strong game for players who enjoy competitive, truly interactive board games. Thank you for watching and have a great day.